I'm going to get started and we can let everyone sort of trickle in. Hello. Hi, Matt. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining the Xoogler School today. Welcome to everyone who's tuning in on YouTube Live. And super excited to hear more about the Associate Product Manager role. We've had a lot of questions about it, and hearing from someone who has gone through the program themselves and sort of defining that and the day in and day out, how you sort of positioned yourself for the role is going to be really helpful. So Matt has done a lot of different things in his career. He's like I said, he was an APM, also a co-founder of multiple companies, which I hopefully hear more about, or if not, I will ask more about them because I'm curious, and also an author, and graduated from MIT, and really excited to hear sort of about your career path, and how students can sort of follow a similar path if they're interested sort of in product management. And with that said, I'll sort of let you introduce yourself maybe in a little bit more of a full way. But Matt, thanks so much for joining us. Really excited to hear this presentation and then sort of get started with questions. So welcome.
Sure thing. Excited to be here. Hi, everybody. I'm Matt Susskind, and today I'll be talking about the Associate Product Manager role at Google, and also a little bit about how to position yourself for it. So just as a quick intro about me, I graduated from MIT with a degree in computer science. Along the way, even though I'd been a coder, I eventually came to realize that things that were exciting to me were not, the how do we structure an architecture, how do we scale things, but actually the what are we building, why, what's good for the user, what are the cool features of this product. And as I did software engineering internships, I realized that at the lower levels of being a software engineer, that's not really the role that you get to play. Instead, that's more of the things that product managers do. And so I realized, okay, I want to be a product manager then. I applied to Google's APM program, got in. I started working there in the fall of 2015. And while I was there, I first worked on Google Play Movies and TV, leading their search and discovery team. And then I moved over to Google Assistant and Search. While I was there, I actually helped launch the Assistant. And our team focused on user delight, which is a pretty interesting problem. So if you want to see some of my more fun launches, you can ask the Assistant, what does a whale sound like, or to play Lucky Trivia. Or if you go to google.com and search for Snake or Solitaire, the games that come up in there are two fun things I helped launch in Search. So to get into the topic of today's talk, what even is the APM program? What is the Associate Product Manager program? Well, to start with, we should probably talk about what product management is to begin with. Depending on the company, it can mean a lot of different things, but I'll mainly be talking from Google's perspective here because that's my experience, and that's probably what all of you are most interested in. Product management is a role that sits in between a lot of different functions. You're not an engineer, but you sit with them. You're not a UX designer, but you work very closely with them on the design. You're not a business person, but you have to understand the business. Really, your job is to understand what matters for this product, what the users care about, and then make sure that whatever needs to happen in order to get that product out happens. In terms of the actual day-to-day, this can mean a lot of different things. Sometimes it's one-on-one meetings with your teammates and stakeholders, to get updates on how things are going, to understand what's important to focus on next, to get a sense of what's happening in related teams. Sometimes it'll be project syncs to get a sense of, where is this feature right now? What's blocking us? What's next? What do I need to know about that's coming down the pipeline? You get a lot of emails, you do a lot of communication, and so a lot of times you'll be that information hub. It's writing up product documents so that, not only are you coming up with what this product should be, but you're making sure that you can scale understanding of it, make sure everybody's on the same page, put whatever details people need to know into easily accessible documents. It's removing whatever roadblocks are in the way. If you need approval from your legal team, if you need to get marketing's approval for something that you're doing, you're the one who's usually going out and making that happen. There are lots of product details that come up as you're building that people might not have realized are important. So you'll have to make snap decisions about, what way you take the product. There's a lot more, user analysis, user research, presenting to leadership so they know what you're doing or to get more resources. It really varies. It's a pretty interesting role in that every day looks different. And as your products and projects change, the work that you do will change fundamentally as well. So it's always interesting, and there's always new things to learn. I would say that the main three pillars of the job, though, come down to these three things: execute, analyze, and strategize. First, for execute, whatever features you're building, whatever product you're building, you need to make sure that all the pieces that it takes to build that product are there, and that they're being done at high quality, and that your team is driving towards launch. So that will mean, working with the engineers to figure out, okay, what's the next piece of this that we need to build? It's working with the legal team to get that approval. It's working with the marketing team to make sure they can support what you're doing, whatever it takes to make sure that a great product actually happens. And analyze, this is, looking at what your users are doing, looking at what the market is like, looking at what other products are out there, whatever you need to do to understand what's important about these products, what's important about this context so that you can build great products on top of it. And then on the strategize side, it's looking ahead at what trends are important. What is your company doing? What's important to Google? Where is the overall product area going? And then making sure that you are prioritizing features and future work, building a roadmap so that you can support that and make sure that your product stays relevant and important for whatever future time you're looking at. So a lot of skills that come into this. Probably the biggest among these, communication. You usually serve as the information nexus for a lot of different teams. You'll be the one who is understanding what the engineers are doing and communicating that out to your other stakeholders. You're going to be the one who takes in, directives from leadership and then communicates that to your engineers so they understand what that means. Prioritization is really important. As a PM, a lot of your job is just saying no to things that don't matter or aren't helpful for your team or product. And so making sure that you understand what's really important here, why it's important, then being able to articulate and communicate that, really important for your team. Looking at the product strategy, as we've talked about, doing data analysis to understand what your users are doing, what the market looks like, what you're going to want to do next. Project management to make sure that all of this gets done, and a lot more. I really couldn't give you a comprehensive breakdown of all the skills involved because, like I said, you'll just do so many different things. And really a lot of it comes down to just being scrappy, being good at figuring out how to get things done, figuring out whatever you need to do in order to make your product happen. So to talk about the actual program itself, I would say that there are three main pillars that make the program really attractive. So first, it's a 2-year rotational program, which means that when you come in, you'll be assigned to a team, you'll work on it for about a year, and then you'll switch to another team. So for me, my first team was Google Play Movies. I really enjoyed my time there, learned a ton, but it's also your first role. And so you're kind of figuring out what it even means to be a product manager, what it takes to be a good teammate. It was my first job out of college, so there's also just getting used to being a full-time employee of a company. Then you rotate to your second team, which you have a little bit more control over and get to pick something that's more targeted towards your interest, what you want to grow in, what kind of team that you want to work with. And there you basically get to hit the ground running because you already now have a clear sense of how the job works and can be effective on this team from the get-go. At the end of your rotations, at the end of that second year, you basically graduate to being a full-time PM. There's not really much of a difference. If you want to stay on that same team, you can. You'll be doing the same things. Just as you grow as a PM, your scope increases. If you do want to switch to another team, that is possible. But I think getting to see 2 different teams is really valuable because you get to see different areas of the company, right? I started in Google Play in digital content, had a very particular way of working. And then I switched over to Search and Assistant, which, in combo were Google's biggest area and one of their biggest new bets. And it was at a completely different stage of its life cycle because Google Play was more of a mature product, but Google Assistant was just gunning up towards launch. And so it was this, crazy rush to get everything done. And so it's really valuable that you get to see more of what happens in the company. You get to get an understanding of what different teams are like, different work styles. And I'll talk a little bit about the community more in a second, but it's also nice that you'll know people all over the company and be able to reach out to them if you ever need help. There's also APM trips, which are really valuable. So the big one is that in between your 2 rotations, in the middle of those 2 years, you take a trip around the world, pandemic notwithstanding. But for my trip, we went to Tokyo, Beijing, Delhi, and then Munich, over the course of a couple weeks. And while you're there, you get to learn about the local markets. You get to learn about users in those markets. You get to learn about the local startup culture. Basically, just see how things are developing. Because for an international company like Google, you can't just have a U.S.-centric mindset, which a lot of us were from the U.S. and come in with that view. So it's a great way to start to understand what it means for Google to be this kind of international business. It's a really, really fun, interesting, enlightening experience. You get to bond with the rest of your APM class as you go on this trip. And I'd say that's one of the biggest selling points. I would say one of the most important parts of this overall, though, is the community that you get from the APM program, both in terms of the class of APMs that you join with and with all the mentorship you get from the rest of the program. This has probably been the most enduring and valuable part of it. So Google does a really good job of getting all of the APMs together and building a strong community among them. They became some of my closest friends, very quickly. And to this day, I'm still in touch with most of them, and they're still my best friends in San Francisco. It's also really valuable from a work perspective in that, let's say that I'm working on Google Assistant, but we need to do something that interfaces with Maps. Now I can just reach out to that APM community, and someone that is in my class probably either works on Maps or did work on Maps and can direct me to the right person to work with for this project. So having this broad community means that you have visibility and access to people all over the company. You can see things that are happening all over the company, which is not something that most people at Google get. It's a huge company. There's so much going on. It's easy to get siloed, but the community keeps that from happening. The program's also really big on mentorship. So when you join, you'll get a couple of different mentors at different levels. Somebody who's a little bit ahead of you, somebody who's mid-career, somebody who's further into leadership, and so they can really help you navigate the challenges that you face as a PM. Whether it's the day-to-day execution, how do I get agreement with my engineer, with my engineering lead? How do I get approval from this legal team? Through to how do I think about structuring my career? How do I think about what team I want to go to next? How do I think about what's most important for my product long term? So all of that mentorship, super valuable, and a huge benefit of the program. At the bottom here, I actually have an APM program overview that's on the official career site. It was written by my friend Nisha, who was in my APM class. It's a great overview of where the program came from, what's great about it, some of the benefits of it, what Googlers think about it. Definitely recommend checking it out, because it's a good intro to, a lot of the different aspects of it. So with all of that said, I want to jump into talking a bit about how you actually get into the program. So there's a couple main things that they're looking for in their APM applicants. First thing I want to say is that this is a new grad role. It's intended for people with at most a couple years of experience. And then because Google's an engineering-driven company, they really are looking for people with a technical background. It doesn't have to be super intense. You don't have to be an incredible coder or a PhD in computer science or anything. I usually explain it to people that the level of background that they're looking at is around a CS minor, maybe like 5 or 6 classes in computer science, or the commensurate experience, self-studied or working on your own products or projects. They're looking for product experience. Have you built products for users before? Have you found ways to exemplify the kinds of skills that a product manager needs to have? They look for leadership. Have you demonstrated it formally or informally? In the ideal case, this is leading some kind of technical or product based projects. And then finally, initiative. Have you found ways to make things happen? Have you built opportunities where you needed them? Have you found ways to, whatever needs to happen, you make it happen. So, I'm actually a PM interview coach, and when a lot of people come to me, there's usually two common problems that they're facing as they try to apply. First is they say, I'm not technical. And really the solution here, if you want to apply to Google's APM program, you have to get technical. There really isn't a way around this. There's so many ways to learn. There are online classes, there are classes at your university. There's information all over the internet. There's Stack Overflow, there's Codecademy, there's resources that can teach you. You probably have friends who are engineers or know about these topics and can help you. You can find opportunities to work on technical projects, whether that's in technical classes or just finding friends to work with, or just deciding, I've learned a little bit of Python and now I just want to see what it takes to build, some fun little toy out of it. And then networking, there's LinkedIn, there's probably alumni from your university, there's probably friends of friends. Just finding technical people to talk to and learn from can also be really valuable. At the end of the day, there's just so much information available out there that you really can't get away with saying like, oh, I didn't have the opportunity to be a technical person. It takes hard work and it will take time to get these skills if you don't have them. But if you want to be an APM at Google, these are the skills that they're looking for. So you really do have to find a way to make that happen. The other problem that's pretty common is I don't have product experience. And really the solution here is to make your own experience. For me, this was the problem that I had. I had a technical background, I had done a lot of CS, and so I could very easily have gone into software engineering and proven that I had those skills, but it became harder to justify why I should be a product manager. And really the solution here is to make your own experience. Obviously there are some internship programs that you could apply to, and if you can get one of those, great. That's a, very clear official stamp that you have product management experience, but most people don't get that, and it's not necessary. So in terms of making your own experience, find ways to take on PM-like roles in your own projects. For me, as I went into my junior year, I had only had software engineering internships, had really only worked on technical projects. But from that year on, I decided that I was going to position myself as the PM on any of the class projects that I did. For instance, I was into game design and development. So a lot of those projects, I would try to take on design or user-focused roles in addition to my development duties. So that meant that I could then talk about my experience designing with a user in mind, prioritizing our engineering effort to make sure we're working on the most impactful things, actually getting a product to launch and making sure that it's successful. Outside of class, you can build your own products. This also really helps with leadership and initiative. So if there is some startup idea that you've had and you can put the product together, or work with a friend to build it, and you can focus on, what are we building, why, what's the strategy here, that's all great experience. And then just out of everything that you've done, even things that you've already done, find the PM take on it. Even if you were doing software development or working on some other kinds of products or projects, you can probably find examples within there where you did have some kind of user-focused efforts, where you did get to prioritize that engineering effort, where you did some data analysis. So finding ways to spotlight those kinds of experiences on your resume can be really helpful. When it comes to the application process, it opens once a year in the early fall. My strong advice as you apply is to find a referral. Again, this is something that you just have to figure out a way to make it happen. There's probably someone in your school's alumni network, a friend of a friend, worst case, cold outreach on LinkedIn to say, hey, I want to learn about what you do. And then if you have a good chat, maybe that could turn into a referral. There are lots of ways to make this happen, and it really does help you stand out. The thing I would say, though, is that if it's somebody that you've worked with before, the stronger that connection, the more weight that referral is going to hold. If it's just somebody that you randomly reach out to and don't know very well at all, it's not going to hold quite as much weight as if it's from somebody who's worked with you. In terms of the timing, Unfortunately, the full-time US roles have already closed. They usually open in early September and are open for just a week or two. Internships are open now for anybody who's planning to graduate after next year, right? So if you would be eligible for full-time roles next year, you can apply for internship roles now. And then EMEA, Europe, Middle East, Africa, basically the international roles will open up in early November, both for full-time and internships. The last thing that I wanted to touch on here, as you go through that application process and once you have applied, you'll have to go through interviews. These are a huge topic. There's a lot to cover here. They're kind of an interesting challenge. They're very different than SWE interviews. So, I would say that there are lots of resources out there online and in books, and you should study them. You can definitely put things together. For me, when I applied to PM, it was kind of before it had blown up quite so much. So back in 2015, when I was figuring this out, mostly I just, searched things online. I reached out to PMs that, I had some kind of connection with, and then I would just ask them, what do I need to know? I would do the practice problems that I could find online that people had posted on Glassdoor and things like that. Nowadays, there are so many sites that, offer to help PMs. There are so many books out there. You can still find lots of free online materials if you don't want to pay. So, you do have a whole wealth of materials at your hands to study, and reaching out to those people to help you, to do mock interviews, all of that will be really helpful. And then the last thing is to just, do a lot of practice, just like you would for SWE interviews or for any other kind of interview. The more practice that you do, the easier that it gets, especially because PM interviews are kind of this interesting, unusual style. That practice will really help you internalize what it takes in order to get through them. As I said, it's a really broad topic, so I didn't want to go super deep on it here, just because it could be an entire talk in itself. But find those resources online. You can also reach out to me if you have any questions. And so that's the end of the material that I had prepared, just to give that introduction to APM. If you have any questions or anything that you want to ask, you can reach out to me. I created an email address just so I don't have my personal one strewn all over the internet, but I will respond if you email me there. I also have my LinkedIn and my Twitter. I assume these slides are going out, but if not, I can also post them somewhere so people can access those. And then finally, as I mentioned, I am a PM interview coach with a site called Exponent. I really like their approach to PM interviews. And if you're just looking for a course to help you, if you're looking for something that's collected material, really valuable and helps guide you through how to, get your grounding with these kinds of questions, I do really recommend their course. So with that, I'll end the presentation section, and I'm happy to answer any Q&A questions that we have.
Awesome, Matt, thanks so much. And thank you for creating an email to answer questions from this. This is awesome. I know that we actually have, I think, at least one student who applied and has more questions sort of on the interview process.
Okay.
And with that said, I really appreciate the presentation. I'm going to open up or head over to the Dory and check out what questions are coming in here. And yeah, the first question, actually, the first two questions here are from Iris, and she says, "Hi Matt, I am Iris. I have applied for the APM internship next summer. What kind of technical questions will be asked? How do you prepare for the technical questions?" And then her second question was following up to that. How would you advise people to prepare for the technical program manager interviews compared to just regular PM interviews?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'll start with the question about technical questions. It can cover a range. Really what Google is looking for here is a sense that you are going to be able to work closely with engineers, understand what they're talking about, and then translate the important facts of that to other teams. You're not going to be designing system architectures yourself. I think during my time at Google, I probably committed less than 10 lines of code overall. But at the same time, in terms of building rapport with engineers, having that technical background helps them understand that what's important to them, that you'll be an effective team member. And it also is helpful when, let's say your team has two different options that they're considering building out, and you need to be able to provide input as the PM of what trade-offs matter here, what's important to the user, what decisions are we going to make. So in terms of the technical question, they usually fall into a couple of different categories, as I like to frame them. One, there's your standard algorithms and data science questions, searching, sorting, graphs, things like that, just to understand, okay, do you have that theoretical CS underpinning? Usually it doesn't involve coding. It might involve some sort of pseudocoding or description of an algorithm, but it's more about the actual problem solving there. It can also be a little bit more general, like how would you design an algorithm for I don't want to give away any particular problems, but how would you design a particular algorithm for some process like like an elevator or something like that. The kinds of things that are, do you understand some technical concept and then can you communicate it to another person, another audience? So these would be questions like, how would you explain how the internet works to a grandmother? Can you understand what's important about the internet, what all the underpinnings there are, what's going to be relevant to that grandmother? Can you understand what the grandmother will understand and then, make that connection between the two? And then there are the larger system design questions, things like, how would you design Instagram's feed? What kind of factors do you think are most important when Uber is trying to match riders and drivers? Things that talk more about, do you understand how systems work, what the trade-offs are going to be in different decisions, how to optimize for what the user cares about most? But then can you also get into at least the technical details there? I would say that, these questions are usually at the difficulty of like a first round SWE interview. They're not super difficult, but they will test your understanding, and you do want to be familiar and have prepared for those as well. As far as technical program manager interviews, I actually don't know a lot about them. Program management and technical program management are a different discipline at Google. They focus more on getting together the resources for projects, making sure that you have enough engineers to do all the things that you want to do, making sure that you have commitments from infrastructure teams to support the work that you're doing. So for TPM, basically they're expected to have a technical understanding so they can work more closely with those other, say, infrastructure teams, rather than just doing the project management stuff that a normal program manager might do. So unfortunately, I don't know much beyond that. But there are lots of resources out there. Exponent does have a TPM course as well, and a Slack community where there are other TPM applicants. But unfortunately, it's not something that I know a lot about.
Great, thanks, Matt. And so a question that sort of goes off of the resources aspect. Someone's asking, as a prospective APM, we are often guided to seminal books such as Cracking the PM Interview. The book, as you would know, contains principles that every APM tries to strictly follow. What are the ways that a prospective APM can differentiate themselves and go beyond the principles taught in the book?
Great, that's a great question. So when it comes to a lot of these books or a lot of the online resources, one thing that does happen is a lot of them try to push frameworks. They say, oh, to answer a design question, you answer it in this way. Start with, talking about the user, et cetera, et cetera. And the thing is that these frameworks are helpful for getting started. They're helpful for getting an understanding of what kinds of important aspects of the question that you'll want to address. But a lot of times they're a one-size-fits-all approach. And these questions can be really varied. They can involve lots of different aspects. And so, to focus on just using the framework, you usually end up missing what's more important about the problem itself. So, if you get a question that's like, what's the future of libraries? Sure, you could go through with one of those standard product design frameworks, but it's probably more important to make sure you include things like, what are the trends that we want to build upon? What's going to happen in the future, as relevant to libraries? Who are these users in the future that are going to be using the libraries? What are the goals of libraries in general right now, and how might that change, right? These aren't things that a framework can just tell you, because these are tailored to the problem itself, right? You have to look at the problem, say, what is important here? What are the aspects that I think are really interesting to bring up? And then how do I work that into a more interesting more useful design. Same for if you get a metrics question or a strategy question. And so what I would say is use the frameworks that these books and courses give you to start to develop your sense of how to answer, get used to it, right? It's like training wheels on a bike, right? You'll learn how to ride, you'll learn how to move, but you're not really going to impress anybody by riding around town with training wheels on. You have to learn how to take them off, ride the bike in your own way, find your own way to answer and get deep into these questions. And then, that will help your answers stand out and feel less stilted.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. That's super helpful. And a question here more around like qualifications from Sam, and that's what specific skills and qualifications are required for getting selected into the Google APM role?
Sure. So as I mentioned before, in terms of what they want to see on your resume, it's going to come down to these things that, you have a technical background, or at least, enough understanding to work with engineers, that you have product experience, places where you found ways to get involvement in designing for users, building products, launching things, that you've taken leadership opportunities and found ways to, either formally or informally lead teams, and that you've taken the initiative to make projects happen or figure out how to, get things done, even if it seemed hard. Those are probably the biggest qualifications that they're looking for on a resume. And then in terms of skills, it can be pretty varied. People come in with different points of view, with different backgrounds. For me, I was very much a user-focused person. There are people who are more process-focused. There are people who are better with data analysis. And you'll gain all of these skills as you go through Google. I mean, I learned a ton about product management, all of the inherent skills that it takes, but I didn't come in with all of those. Just as long as you can demonstrate that you've been working on some relevant aspects, that you have something to offer, that you've put in work, that's really what it'll take.
Great, thank you. And Renee's asking, she says, "Hi Matt, I'm a freshman who pretty much knows I want to work in the APM role. What kind of software engineering internships or product internships help overall until I can apply for the APM internship my junior year?" So essentially, like how can she get ahead of the curve?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's great that you have time to figure this out. I would say, there's not any inherent product or technical internship that's going to be better or worse. Obviously there are some companies that are more prestigious. So, maybe having like a Google software engineering internship. I know that they have their, for lower level, for earlier in their college career, internships for Swedes and things like that. So that might help just to, have already had some connection at Google. Beyond that, I would say just making sure that you're doing good work and then finding these opportunities to do interesting technical projects, find ways to get product experience. Like I said, I hadn't had any official PM internships. And so, that's not necessarily going to be the bottleneck. It's just going to be a matter of how do you find projects to work on things like that. So if you have friends who are entrepreneurial and you have some idea that you think is really interesting and you want to start a company, or at least just like some kind of like side hustle, some side project that's fun, that can be great. As you think about the courses that you want to take at your school, if you can find ones, definitely you want to get that deep technical understanding. But if you can also find classes that are more about design, I took a web design class. Like I said, I did a lot of game design. And so all of these, even though I was using my technical skills to build whatever projects, they gave me really good opportunities to get out and work with users, to do research, to think about, okay, how is this going to actually be used by this user? What works, what doesn't, do that testing, make those changes, continue to iterate, and then, launch, measure how it did. To not directly answer your question, I don't know that there are that many internships that you have to have, but the more important thing is figuring out how am I going to get this experience through whatever means I have available to me.
Absolutely. No, yeah, I think that's spot on. Question from Alina, which is, I've heard that being a PM is like being a mini CEO. Is that true? How relevant are entrepreneurial skills to PM roles?
Yeah, that is a great question. It's a little bit of a meme among PMs, the quick explanation is I'm kind of like the mini CEO. It is both true and not true. You know, I think especially as you get further along in your PM career, the options that you have to make your product successful start to grow. You certainly could use some of them as a younger PM, but it's harder to one, get buy-in from your team, and two, know that they're the right move. But you know, in the early days, a lot of your role involves execution and just making sure that things get done. And honestly, you know, that's not that much like being a CEO. It's more project management and making sure that things get done, with some, you know, important decision making. As you get more and more embedded into your team, as you grow as a product manager, certainly you do more of the strategy, and those are CEO like skills. But they are all the underpinnings of what it takes to have that kind of role. And Google definitely does look for entrepreneurial people because of these, you know, ideas of leadership and initiative, right? They want people who are going to look at a problem and say, okay, I don't know how to solve this yet, but I can make this happen. So I'd say that's, you know, that's where that comes in. As you get further into your PM career, you know, you start to command more resources, you start to have more options available to you. And so, you know, your product is not just going to be, you know, what features am I building, but also, you know, what's the marketing strategy around it? Who could we partner with? Do we need to acquire a company? You know, there's all these other ways that you can make products successful beyond just, we're going to have some engineers build some stuff. And so that also definitely gets into that CEO like idea where, you know, you might be going to your VP and say like, hey, I really think we should think about partnering with this company. As far as the entrepreneurial side of it, after I left Google, I went into film production for a while just because it was an interest of mine and I wanted to learn something different for a while. But I ended up starting my own company as well. And so I think the things I learned at Google really did prepare me for that entrepreneurship journey. Just an understanding of, you know, how I can take some vague problem, understand what's important, cut to the core of what this product is that's going to solve these users' needs, and then drive towards that with my engineering co-founders. So the entrepreneurial skills, you know, not everybody who goes to Google wants to be an entrepreneur eventually. You know, I'd say that there was a mix among my APM class of people who are, you know, I want to be an employee versus, you know, I eventually intend to become an entrepreneur. And that's totally fine. Google understands that. But, you know, it will definitely develop your skills in that arena. And the kinds of skills that an entrepreneur needs are very helpful as you go through your APM journey.
Great, thanks, Matt. Let me see here. Have you seen trends in the field of studies that APMs have graduated from?
I mean, the most common one is computer science. You know, it's, especially for a company like Google where they're looking for that technical background, it's kind of the clearest signal that you have that. So it is helpful, but that's not to say that you have to be a software engineer. You know, I've heard of people from, you know, economics or business. I've seen people with English degrees applying. You know, it's, you know, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. I wouldn't say that it's the most critical thing. There definitely are certain things that people tend to come from more, partially because you get that signal, partially because just if you're interested in tech and these kinds of companies and going to Google, you probably are interested in computer science. So it's more likely that you self-select into that kind of program anyway. So I don't want to say that, you know, doing a computer science degree is the best way to do this. I think whatever you think is interesting, but still related to learning the kinds of topics that will help you here will be valuable. But you probably will want to take some computer science courses along the way. So figuring out a way to make that happen. If Google APM is really what you want to go for, you know, you want to make sure that you can include that.
Great, thank you. That's good to know. It's not all, you know, on there. If there's a majority computer science, there's still room to sort of work with other sort of majors and
yeah. And
tracks.
you know, depending on your school, you may have like a UX design or like HCI. You know, that's a pretty common one as well, because it is still technical, but more focused on the design, which obviously is, you know, a nice fit for what PMs do.
Right. Question here, which is how do you develop your leadership and organization skills to lead your team during your time and maybe even before? Like, how did you prepare to sort of be in that leadership role?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, I had it pretty easy because at MIT, there's a program called the Gordon Engineering Leadership Program. And basically the idea is that you join and they develop you into a leader. You get a lot of experience leading teams. You're with a squad basically for the whole semester. And then you'll rotate, who gets to be the leader each week. With that, there's somebody who's watching you, giving you feedback at the end, like, okay, I think you did a great job involving all of your teammates and making sure their voices were heard, but you didn't do a great job managing time. So here's how to improve that. It's very feedback focused. So I think that was really valuable for me. Obviously, not everybody has access to that, but I think the principles still apply, right? Finding opportunities to be a leader on a team. You may not be good at it at first, right? You're going to struggle. You're not going to be entirely sure what you're doing, but if you have friends or things that are relatively low stakes, it's not that hard to find a case where you can say, okay, I'm going to be a leader here, or I'm going to take on some leadership responsibilities. The other side of that is getting that reflection, right? Self-reflecting on how you've done. Hey, do I feel like we're making good progress? Do I think that I'm communicating well with my team? Do I think that we have a good plan? Or what am I feeling worried about? Especially if you can get feedback from other people, from the people on your team. Hey, what am I doing well? How am I not serving you? What could I do better? Getting advice from a mentor, somebody who's outside the team, but maybe able to get some visibility can be really valuable. I think that's probably what was most helpful. It was the actual practice of doing it, and then being able to reflect, get advice, do my own self-reflection on how things went, and then use that to continue improving as I continue to lead teams.
Awesome, thank you. Let me see. A question sort of on networking. I think you touched on that earlier, sort of how important it is to sort of tap into your network. Question is, what is your recommendation on how to best utilize your college alumni network?
Yeah. So for me, I got a recommendation from somebody who was in that engineering leadership program, actually. Because I was part of that, affiliation on campus, and then somebody else from that group had gone on to be a Google APM, it gave us like a nice connection to start from. So he knew, oh yeah, I know that the program, acronym is GEL. So I know that GEL students are usually pretty good, very smart, hardworking, a good fit for the kinds of things that APM is looking for. And so he was willing to, talk with me and then eventually give me a recommendation. So if there are organizations that you're in like that, either some kind of leadership organization, or, if you are in a fraternity or sorority, or some kind of like student group, people that you're going to have some kind of common interest and background with are great people to reach out to, because they'll know a little bit more about what you're about. Beyond that, people are more willing than you think to talk, especially to students, about their career. So, if you find an APM who's from your school, or a product manager at Google who's from your school, if they have an alumni database, great to search through that, see who's at Google. You can look them up on LinkedIn, all sorts of ways to find people. And then, you could try reaching out to them. Not everyone will respond. Not everybody will take the time to talk, but you'll be surprised how often just saying, hey, I'm a student, I want to learn about product management and wanted to, just take a 15-minute phone call to ask you about it, or 30 minutes, people are usually pretty willing to do that. That gets less and less true as you get out of school, and it's just, hey, I'm some, new grad, or hey, I'm some person who's 5 years out of school. But people are still willing to talk, even with cold outreach. But definitely for students, people are very happy to share what they've learned and talk to you.
Awesome, thank you. And this is a question on your sort of, I guess, your time at Google. What was your most memorable experience as an APM?
That's a good question. Give me a moment to think about it. I mean, there are a lot. So much of the APM trip, it's all really interesting. You're with 40 other people your age, learning all these things and having fun with them and exploring these new markets. So have a lot of memories from that. But I think one of the best was actually my first major launch on my first team. So on Google Play Movies, um, basically, we had realized that with certain searches, there was a poor user experience. Like if you search for action movies, then you would just get a whole bunch of action movies in a list with no indication of, why they were good, or, no real attention paid to what the user's intent there might be. And so one of the engineers on our team, and talking with him, he had a great insight that he was actually able, using signals that we had about these movies to categorize them. So instead of just a whole mess of action movies, maybe what the user's actually looking for is they want to know what types of action movies there are out there. Are there action comedies, superhero movies, martial arts movies? Here are the top rated, here are the Oscar nominated. So these were all signals that he could generate. And so we realized that to arrange the movies like that might make it a lot easier for users to understand, here are my options. I really was looking for a zero movie. Great. And now I'll buy this one. And so I think both from a design perspective, it was really exciting to us to move forward on this, to actually go through the process of building it, and then get it out to users. And it was also great that when we launched it, it was really successful, right? We saw the acquisition rates on these queries go way up. And so, this was like my first really major launch. It was really successful. And, it was one of these things that just came from a clear sense of this is what the user's actually trying to do here and how we're not serving them. So I kind of take that as, one of my favorite successes as a PM.
That's awesome. No, that's really, really cool. I think that sort of brings it to life. The presentation that you gave, and like that ties it all together. So really, really cool to hear about that experience. Question here on other than it's sort of on the internship, students that's looking for like a little bit more guidance on internships or job responsibilities that they should list or prepare for the interviews that they can sort of say with confidence. I think that would help back up their case.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So it will depend, obviously, on your exact experience, the teams that you're on. You don't want to lie about anything that you've done, or be too or embellish too much, because you might get asked about it, and you'll look really bad if it's clear that you haven't actually done this thing. But finding ways to highlight, was there somewhere where you got to think about what the user was doing and then design features around that? Was there somewhere where looking at data, you got to say, hey, I think this is the feature that's going to be most impactful? Were there cases where you communicated with lots of different stakeholders to get alignment and make sure that everybody knew what was going on? Oh yeah, I had to get marketing, legal, merchandising, and our business development team all on the same page about what we were doing with this. I can't be super specific because I don't know anybody's individual experience, but just thinking about the kinds of things that PMs do around communicating, prioritizing, setting strategy, executing on projects, analyzing the market. If you have tasks that you've done that you think fit into these kinds of categories, those are all great things to illuminate. And sometimes they're not even going to be the major function of your role, right? You might have been a software engineering intern somewhere, and most of what you did was building software, but at some point you got to do some of that, and that's fine. You can totally bring that up on your resume. Like, I do have experience doing this, even if I was a software engineer.
Awesome. And a specific question here, which is, do you know more about the Google Policy Fellowship and if it fellowship program, and do you know if it's similar to the APM program? No worries if not.
Yeah, sorry, I don't.
That's
Sounds
totally
cool.
fine.
The other program that's also in that vein is the APMM program, so the Associate Product Marketing Manager role. I also don't know much about their processes. I know that it's kind of like a sister program to the APM. They also take a trip, but obviously they're more focused on the marketing side. So I've met a couple of them, and we tried to do some kind of mixers while I was at Google. Very cool people, but also don't know much about that program either.
Awesome, thank you. And then a question, which is what do PMs do if they sort of move on from that role? And then on top of that, like how long traditionally do Google sort of APMs spend in that role and continue on? Is there like a normal trajectory that, or is it sort of not one size fits all?
It's not one size fits all. I will say that if you stay at Google, your trajectory tends to be faster than most other PMs. You know, one, you've kind of been selected, right? That, okay, you're, highly effective PM, we very selective application process and interviewing process. And so that might be part of it. But I think also, APMs are given a certain amount of expectation. And so they tend to, rise up their ranks faster than I've seen, other PMs who join from elsewhere. Part of that is, I think, the inherent skills. Part of that is just, the opportunities and the mentorship and the network helping you be more effective because you can make more things happen. Beyond that, a lot of APMs are entrepreneurial. So, a significant portion of my class has left by now, a lot of them to start their own companies or work on small startups. Um, you know, APMs have pretty varied interests, so it's hard to say, exactly where people are going to go. But I would say, you know, I would say that, probably, I left after 2 years, a couple left around when I did, which is basically when the program ended. And then over the next year or two, more of them left. And then it's mostly trickled to a stop by now, I think, because for most people who are there, 5 years now, you're pretty, you feel pretty good about your time at Google. You're pretty sure that it's somewhere that you like being, and that, it's not, right. If you had wanted to leave to do something else, you might have gotten pulled away earlier. So, there's kind of this interesting dynamic and the churn rate there. But we're all still very close. We have, like group chats and stuff like that, and we still hang out. So, it's always interesting to see all the different things that people have gotten up to. I think someone from my class went to France to learn how to make pastries. I went into film. One of my classmates from the APM program is actually the guy who founded Exponent, this PM interviewing site. We have people at startups. We have people who went back to Google after leaving and realized, what, Google was a great place to be, and I actually just want to have more impact there. So there's all sorts of things that you can do after. And I think it's a really interesting, one, place to learn and place to work and grow. And if you do want to go do something else after, it's also a great springboard to getting into whatever else you want to do. Because, being able to say, hey, I was at Google is a really interesting signal to a lot of people. If it's the tech world, saying that you're an APM obviously carries a lot of weight. And, I think that's why there's so many interesting, varied things that people end up doing afterwards.
Awesome. And then sort of to bounce off that, you sort of moving on into film, like what if you could go back, what was your like favorite aspect of the culture at Google? And what was sort of the deciding factor on you moving on from Google, and what did you get into after that?
Yeah. So my favorite aspect of the culture at Google. One, everybody, just a lot of great people. I really enjoyed everyone I worked with. Lots of smart people, lots of kind people. Not everything that Google does is, perfect. Sometimes they make mistakes, but, from the inside, everyone that I worked with, I could tell was committed to trying to do what was best for the user. And, really did care about building great products for them. And I also really liked that, Google had great processes. So they spent a lot of time thinking about how do we make our people more effective? How do we make sure that, any mistakes we make, we don't make again? And so, that was all, I think, really valuable just from being internal to a company. Obviously, as much as they like to position themselves as agile and, startup-like, they are a big company. They're, billions of users using their products. And so they have to be, cognizant of what they release and how it affects all those users. But for any company of that size, I think they are, one of the best run and, like most effective at getting things done. In terms of why I left, I had been at Google 2 years and I was starting to look ahead at what's next. As the program winds up, even though there's not really anything that meaningfully changes, it's like a nice milestone to start to think about, where I am, where I'm going. And as I looked ahead, I looked at my manager, my director, my VP, all of these people in my management chain who I saw doing their jobs, really smart people, great product leaders. But at the same time, I just didn't want to do the job that they did. There were other skills that I wanted to develop that it didn't seem like Google could teach me. I wanted to be somewhere where it was a little bit scrappier, a little bit less sure what was going on, basically something more entrepreneurial. And so that made me realize, okay, I probably want to leave. And at the same time, I had been working in film production on the side. I'd been making shorts with a group in San Francisco, had really enjoyed that. And so I said, you know what, since I know that I want to do something that's riskier, where I'm going to learn more, where I'm going to be using different skills, and I know that I do really enjoy this film production work so far, why don't I move down to LA, see how the industry actually works, and then go from there. And I'm sorry, I think there was a third part to your question, but I don't remember what it was.
One second, you just cut out for a second. I think you hit on everything that I had asked. So thank you, and that definitely makes sense in terms of you sort of moving into the film industry. A question which is about sort of more than Google, which are like, what companies would you consider becoming a PM at? Where do you think there are strong sort of opportunities outside of Google as well?
Yeah, a lot of it will depend on the person who's applying. As I mentioned briefly, different companies have different styles of PM. So I was an intern at Zynga, and they have a very different PM culture, at least when I was there. Not technical, but more focused on the business. They were almost halfway between business analysts and PM. So they were focused a lot on A/B testing, running experiments, figuring out, okay, what are the features we're going to use to drive our business, and then working closely with the designers on that. I was a PM intern at Disney, where, again, they don't work very closely with the engineers. Maybe a couple of them work with an engineering lead occasionally, but again, it's more about the, what are the products, the user design, the metrics, what are the operations here? It just depends on what you're looking for. Facebook has their RPM program, which is similar to APM except not technical. They usually work more with the policy and legal and design teams than with the engineers. For me personally, just because I'm interested in the entertainment world, I'm interested in companies that are doing interesting things with digital distribution or content production, whether that's on the UGC, kind of low production quality side of things. Or that's the larger streaming companies, or all of these interesting startups that are popping up all over this space. But I think that it will just depend. I'm looking for companies that are better for that. If you want to do something that is really technical, Google and companies like it are a great place for that. And then it depends on what skills you want to develop, because at a startup, obviously you have your hands in many more things and have to wear a lot of different hats. And so if you did want to be involved in marketing or business strategy or any of these other things in a deeper level, startup will give you more exposure to that versus a larger company where your role, certainly, day to day, I was doing a lot of different things, but the overall role was a little bit more certain, right? It would change from team to team, but it was pretty steady in terms of like what areas of the product I was focusing on.
Great. I think I will finish up with this one question. Matt, thanks so much for spending all this time answering these questions. I really appreciate it. And that question is sort of, do you know any tech startups that hire for PM like interns? Are there startups that have potential?
A great question. I unfortunately don't know. If you have another question on deck, I just don't know off the top of my head who would be hiring, especially given current conditions.
Yeah, given COVID, absolutely. There's one question here, which is, what products are you impressed by the students should use as they develop their PM skills?
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, it depends on what your interests are. I would say the more general point is as you go out and use products, you know, people all over Twitter will talk about products that they think are interesting or that you should check out. You know, I think one that a lot of people are talking about recently is like you know, people, you know, they like Robinhood, they like Coinbase, you know, all sorts of products that are great out there. I think the more important thing is that in general, if you want to be a great product manager, you should think about, you know, the products you're using and why they're designed the way they are. Who are the users that they're trying to target with particular features? What are the metrics that this company is probably trying to drive with these features? How do the features they built actually manage that? Where might the product go next? What works well about it? What doesn't work about it? For you as a user, why is it that you like this product? What is it that you wish it also did? All of these things, you know, and not just thinking about them, but also talking about them out loud to other people, really help you hone your product skills and will help as you go into interviews. You know, the more you can talk about this stuff, the more you can try to get into that mind space of like, how is a product manager thinking about these things, and then express that in your daily life. You know, the easier it's going to be to do that in an interview, but also just on the job. It'll make you a better product thinker.
Absolutely. Matt, thanks so much. And thank you for creating your own email to respond to more sort of questions if people, if students had them during this and they weren't able to ask them, or they may be more niche. I would definitely follow up with Matt. Thanks. We'll definitely share the slides as well. So thank you. It's been an awesome hour, and thanks for prepping these slides and spending time with the Xoogler School today. We really appreciate it.
I really appreciate you having me. Thank you to everybody for attending. And I hope you all have a great day.
Yeah, you too, Matt. And to everyone else tuning in, we have another product-based conversation happening tomorrow with John Zazinski at 9 a.m. Pacific. He's going to speak about his career in product, spanning Apple and Google Maps, and another great conversation about this field where there's a lot of interest. So we look forward to seeing you there. And with that said, definitely follow up on YouTube and all our social media links. I'll put them up as I sort of sign off here. But Matt, thanks so much, and everyone, we'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.